I would happily say that that's the best champagne ever made. It is potentially true, but I did say that that was the best Cristal rosé ever made,
Okay.
and I really do believe. I continue to believe that.
Welcome to the Wine-Centric Show inside this Relais and Chateau wine cellar of the Farrington House here. Lots of bottles of champagne on the wall, which is perfect because today I have a titan who is dubbed the Oracle of Champagne. He is the renowned author of Champagne, the Essential Guide. He is Peter Liem. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Matt. It's really great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's really great to have you. I want to get right into it. Peter, who's telling the truth about Dom Pérignon? Is it Limoux or did he go to Champagne first?
Yeah, there's always the argument. I know there's this historical, there are these historical documents showing sparkling wine in Limoux for a long, long time. As far as we know, if we're talking méthode champenoise, right? So like méthode traditionnelle, if we're talking fermentation in bottle, the earliest records that we have of people actually deliberately making sparkling wine in this way is actually from England.
Okay.
So just before the time of Dom Pérignon. And so, yeah, as far as we know, these are the origins. It's probable that sparkling wine came about accidentally before then, because second fermentation happens a lot when wine isn't being controlled. But it was in England that we actually see people trying to control the process for the first time.
Okay, so let's unpack that for a second. And we're kind of going to be in between, like, obviously you're on a master level of champagne. Some of my listeners, I hope, are on like a Champagne 101. So we're going to meet somewhere in the middle. So for those of you that are wondering, what are we talking about? Secondary fermentation, it's when yeast is reintroduced into a bottle. The bottle is then, when the sugar is not fully fermented, the bottle is then Coke bottle capped, and then the yeast starts eating the sugar again, and voila, you have bubbles. Okay, that's a very, very
Exactly.
general explanation of that. Okay, so then we should be drinking like Gusborne and English sparkling wine as our reference point then instead? I mean,
Perhaps.
unpack it. So what happened and how did we discover this?
Well, like I said, probably this would happen accidentally in the past, and it would have been seen as a fault. And
But then
something that's
bottles would
undesirable.
explode, right? Because you wouldn't
Well,
have the champagne
yes,
bottle.
for sure, for sure. But so back in, the 17th century, the weather was cooler and a harvest was later. And so wine would be put into bottle and it might not finish fermentation. So it might finish partially. And then it would go through the winter. The temperature would get colder, and so the yeast would go dormant. And so these bottles would lie in the cellars, until the spring. And once the weather started to warm up again, then the yeast would become active, and so then fermentation would start again. And then, at best you get a little sparkle. At worst, you get exploding bottles.
You have a lot of broken glass all over the place.
Yeah, and this is really in the early days of actually putting wine in bottle.
Right.
Back then, wine would be shipped in cask, and that's how it was bought and sold. And so it was the end user who would like buy a cask and put it in a bottle just for personal consumption.
Yeah, they pour it into jugs or something in their own home.
Yeah. So I would buy a cask of wine, and I would have my bottles and just do it at my house. But so apparently, it was the English who developed a sort of taste for this little sparkly wine. And they liked that effect of this little prickle in these accidental bottles. So they were wondering, how can we control this? So one of the main things, and one of the reasons that it started in England and not in France, was that at this time the French didn't have the technology to make bottles strong enough to withstand this kind of second fermentation. So you had bottles, you had a greater incidence of exploding bottles. But the English, they had hotter fire, and they had the technological capability to create stronger glass. And so this is why, like, the first recorded experiments that were successful were actually in England.
Fascinating. Okay. So where does the lore of Dom Pérignon and the monk who did it become a story? I mean, I get it, it's through the telephone and all that, but how does that become England to Champagne?
Well, so two things. One, Dom Pérignon was an actual winemaker, actual historical figure, worked in the Abbey of Ovier in Champagne. Very, very important for winemaking in Champagne.
Mhm.
So yeah, as far as his stature as a winemaker, that's undeniable. What we know of him, he didn't really write anything down, but what we know of him is all through one of his pupils who did write a bunch of stuff down, which, his this book is still in the library in Epernay. You can go and read it. But from what we can tell, Dom Pérignon, he was not interested in sparkling wine at all. So he was interested in making good wine. He definitely was the kind of progenitor of a lot of quality-minded processes that we still associate with champagne today. So like pressing, pressing to obtain a really clear and really fine juice. Blending, from various places. He was supposedly like a master blender, and so he was very interested in different terroirs in Champagne, and so he would blend these terroirs to create a better wine or a more complex wine. But so all of this in blending though was really to make still wine, and there is absolutely no record of him actually, making sparkling wine.
Right.
The sort of legend of Dom Perignon is the whole "come quickly, I'm seeing stars" and all this. This was actually much, much later. This that quote actually is from an advertisement in like the late 19th century.
Remind
So
me of the quote. How does it
it's
go?
supposedly it's Dom Perignon creates sparkling wine for the first time, and he's so enamored with it that he says, "Come quickly, I'm seeing stars," or I'm tasting stars, or something to this effect. And that's pure fabrication. Yeah, long story short, Dom Perignon was hugely important for winemaking and for champagne, but really a lot of what we attribute to him with sparkling wine is invented after the fact.
Okay. So that's a perfect segue into help me understand why it is then that champagne has become the North Star for traditional method, secondary fermentation, sparkling wine, when obviously we have all these great examples, not only in France, but as you say, in England,
Mm,
and actually they're making wonderful, world-class sparkling wine now. How did it
sure.
come to be that champagne is the flagship?
As far as this type of sparkling wine, so the traditional method of second fermentation bottle, that champagne has the longest history of doing it. So it might have been invented in England, but they didn't really pursue it.
Mm,
The English sparkling wine as we know it today, is really a contemporary invention. I mean, this is, it's essentially new world wine. As far as expertise and an experience, the Champenois have the longest history and the longest track record.
okay.
And so then, I mean, I know I live in Champagne and I write about Champagne, not to appear chauvinistic, but because of this long experience, and because of, a history much, much longer than any other sparkling wine region, you have to say that Champagne has a history of making the most complex and the finest sparkling wines of this type. Today, of course, there are many, many sparkling wines around the world, some of which are of amazing quality. But historically speaking, Champagne was certainly the finest. And for many of these sparkling wine regions around the world, Champagne was the model that they sought to emulate.
It's funny because obviously I'm always caught in between this idea of like wine professional and speaking to the consumers. And you still have a lot of consumers who like wine, who appreciate it. They might not be super knowledgeable. And the idea of walking into a restaurant and asking, yes, I'll have a glass of champagne. And then the server's always at a conundrum of, if they're knowledgeable, well, do I give them a glass of actual champagne or do they mean Prosecco, or just any sparkling wine? And so that
Absolutely.
idea of champagne is, and you can make Cremant, you can make Cava, you can make these world-class sect, and but or Franciacorta from Italy, and everyone's saying, I feel like that thing voice in my head when I taste those wines, be like, these are great, but it's not champagne. It might not be champagne, but let's take a quick break to talk about a local business who is providing lots of sparkles. There's somebody in here locally that helps me keep the lights on the Wine Centric show, and that's Heather Donovan. So people want to move to this area. I'm in North Carolina in the Triangle, and she is the titaness of realty in this area. She is a great resource. She is a wonderful person. She has a list of preferred vendors that's like beyond gold. And if you need a house, you're looking to move to this area, your friend's looking to move to this area. Peter, when you want to, move to this verdant, beautiful area of the Triangle of North Carolina, call Heather Donovan or check out
Absolutely.
heatherdhomes.com. That's Heather Donovan at heatherdhomes.com. Okay, so we were talking about champagne and it being the North Star, and you have all of these other great world-class sparkling wines, but in my mind, it's always like, well, it's not champagne, So that's neither here nor there. Let's talk into this idea of what you talk about champagne having reinvented itself, and kind of no other region being as introspective as it has over the last 20 years. What do you think prompted that and changed that?
Well, it's hard to say, but certainly champagne is a very different environment today than it was 30 years ago. I entered the wine trade in 95, 96, and I was a young wine retailer in San Francisco. So the wine market, here in the United States, as far as champagne was concerned, yeah, there were a few growers. So there was like Thibault Valois, imported by Martine. Kermit Lynch was working with Paul Barra and Jay LaSalle. Bone Imports was working with Agripar on the West Coast. And at my store, we carried these, but really champagne was dominated by 15 brand names, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these were the important champagnes. These were what people thought of as champagne. This is what clients were coming in to purchase. And people might buy Agripar if they just didn't have enough money that day to buy Veuve Clicquot. It was grower champagne. These things are definitely seen as cheaper alternatives. As a young wine student learning about champagne, you learn the profiles of all these famous brands, and that's certainly valid. I mean, I drink those same wines today, so they're certainly still around. But I went to Champagne for the first time in 1996. And I met all these other people. I started tasting all these other wines that, I had no idea of. And what I was finding on the ground in Champagne was completely different than what I was seeing in the United States. And so that really intrigued me. And I wanted to go back and find out more, right? And so I kept going back to Champagne every year after that.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
You were saying that, at first there was the periphery of grower champagnes in that were in your purview, but yet you still went to Champagne. Like you're a deep diver guy, pun intended, but you decided to go to Champagne. Think with what you're explaining, just like, well, there's the big houses and I kind of know them. So it was like the intention to go to Champagne just because it's Champagne. I probably need to go there. And then it was different when you actually got there.
Yes. So, at this time, I wanted to go everywhere.
Yeah.
I was reading everything about everything. I wanted to learn about every single wine region in the world. And ideally, I would visit every wine region in the world. But so, yes, I was traveling around Europe, visiting various places. And Champagne was certainly on that list because, of course, it's
Champagne.
It's an extremely famous wine region, super prominent. And I wanted to go visit there. But I was going there to visit, Paul Roger and Krug and Veuve Clicquot and Louis Roederer and the names that I knew. It was when I got there that I started to taste other things and I began to see an alternate picture of Champagne. Not necessarily one that was better or, not necessarily something. It's not like they kept the good stuff at home and sent the bad stuff abroad. It was probably the reverse. In fact, but I was seeing things that were different. Things like the story of Champagne when I was there in the late 90s did not match up with the story of Champagne that we were talking about in export markets, in the US, or that we were reading about, that people were writing about. So that kind of disconnect was really interesting to me because then I started asking why. And so, I followed, the evolution of this wine region very closely, over the next 30 years, I think. And so there were just a lot of things that were developing, right? And so when you talk to people in like the 2000s, like once by the late 2000s, then, grower champagne had become a category in export markets and certainly in the United States. And so you would listen to people talk about what it was that was changing about champagne. So some people would say, well, the farming got better, right? So they would point to like organics or not even necessarily organic or biodynamic viticulture, but just improved farming. It's like, okay, yeah. Some people would talk about the lowering of dosage. So like more non-dosé wines, more low dosage wines, across the board. I mean, even houses that had formerly dosed at 12 were now dosing at 9. Most growers were dosing below 5, and so people would talk about that. It's like,
And
okay,
just
yeah, that's
Peter,
also
just
true.
sorry, pause for a second. When we talk about dosage, you're talking about basically putting sugar back, or a sweet wine or beet sugar back in the bottle to help the acidity and balance out the wine. My
Yeah.
words.
So after a wine is disgorged, so after the yeasts are taken out and the bottle is made ready for shipment, it's typically necessary to add some sugar back in. And as consumers, we kind of balk at that because we don't really like to add sugar to do anything if we don't have to, right? It sounds like this kind of additive and whatever. But I think of it very much like finishing a dish with salt. I mean, salt is an additive, but we don't eat our food without it. Salt does more than just make food salty. Salt completes a dish and it brings out other flavors in particular ways that wouldn't happen if you didn't have the salt there.
Yeah. I'm
And
gonna clip that for
dosage,
my wife, by the way, about salt. She's always telling me, "Stop, no, 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 no."
yeah, gonna do it for my doctor too.
There you go.
But
But yeah, yeah, you were talking about. Just was asking you to define dosage, and I definitely want your philosophy, but I also want you to continue about what was changing about the farming and
yeah,
people changing their levels of dosage back in there.
so dosage was definitely coming down, like in
Hmm.
the 2000s, right? And this is an undeniable like fact. Other people like talked about, well, simply the rise of grower champagne, right? So in the past we had a bunch of big brands, and now we have these small family owned estates. We like that narrative. We think in the wine world, we tend to think that smaller is better, that these family run people, family run estates, like farming their own vines, this is intrinsically better than a big multinational corporation. So that was very much part of this narrative of changing champagne as well. But in my book, I all these things, and I said that I eventually came to think that all of these things, they're all true, but all of these things were really symptoms, or these things were sort of like reflections of a larger kind of background picture, right? And to me, it was as simple as simply people taking champagne seriously as a real wine. So that's producers, consumers, wine professionals, everybody. Um, I mean, even producers themselves. The atmosphere back in the 90s was very much one of champagne being something else. I mean, on the consumer level, me as a retailer, like I had some people coming into the store, they didn't even know that champagne was wine. I mean, they
Yeah.
didn't even realize that champagne was made from grapes, right? It's and you would talk about it as wine, and then they would say, "Well, why are you calling it wine? It's champagne." And from a producer point of view, I think there were a lot of people kind of stuck in this 20th century paradigm, thinking like acknowledging like, "Oh yeah, champagne is a wine, but it's champagne. It's something else."
Yeah, you have it for celebrations, or maybe you have it to start a meal, but you certainly don't have champagne with the meal. And are you saying that producers, even like champagne producers, were like you would be for dinner with them and they might open champagne to start, but then like they're opening still wines for dinner and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because people always need a red wine later,
Yeah.
and yeah, for sure, for sure. But then I think that there was a sort of newer generation of people that had tasted widely outside of the Champagne region, much more so than their parents did. They, familiar with what else was going on in the wine world at this time, and so they were asking the same questions about champagne as one would about any other one. And so, questions about viticulture, questions about expression, questions about place, terroir, winemaking. And so when people were asking themselves, well, how do I make better champagne? How do I improve? Everybody wants to improve the quality of the product, right? Or everybody that we're interested in. The question about how to make a better champagne became very different in the late 90s and early 2000s than before. Before, we were really just talking about the champagne process. People were like, well, we can do these things to refine, the second fermentation. We can like reduce the temperature of our first fermentation to create more finesse and more delicacy, or all these kinds of like technical winemaking things. And by this time, then people were starting to really address other things like, well, maybe our wine should be an expression of terroir like any other wine. any other great wine in the world, right? I mean, champagne, we know that champagne is an expression of terroir.
Right.
Because otherwise there wouldn't be any difference between Champagne and Franciacorta or Anderson Valley or Tasmania. There's a reason why Champagne says Champagne on the bottle. And so people kind of, or producers, kind of went back to ground zero and said, well, what does it mean to express place? So you had, of course, then one of the very direct results of asking this question is addressing your viticulture. And so that sort of led to this kind of viticultural evolution, starting around, 2000. So, people started to really examine the terroir of Champagne in ways that they hadn't for the last 30 or 40 years. We as wine consumers, most of us were born in the last half of the 20th century or beginning of 21st by now. And we were sort of introduced to Champagne as a blended wine. And in the 90s, nobody ever used the word terroir in conjunction with Champagne, except for in the most general sense. Champagne is a place in northern France on chalk with bad weather.
Yeah.
And that's about it. But in fact, prior to, let's say, 1970, terroir was a hugely important topic in Champagne. And you read all these old books, like, books from like the 1960s all the way back to whatever, the like beginning of the 18th century. And the idea of place was always really front and center. It was a very, very important topic in Champagne, just like it would be in any other wine region. And we lost that in the last part of the 20th century because of this kind of focus on branding, on this huge expansion in production, selling champagne, by brand rather than by place.
Yep.
And so, this all got kind of lost in the conversation. And so a big part of treating champagne as a real wine is bringing it back to this idea of an expression of place. And today, I mean, it's taken for granted, and it's kind of amazing that mentalities have changed in such a short time, in 20 years. But today, I mean, people are having conversations that nobody would ever have thought of in the 1990s,
Right?
And that's really heartening.
Well, wine professionals are having those conversations. Some consumers are having those conversations. I'm still not sure if that conversation has gone mainstream, so to speak.
But that's okay, because it's the people that matter, the producers, wine professionals, wine writers. I mean, everything trickles down, right? Everything. I mean, wine professionals are there to educate consumers. And so if wine professionals are saying the wrong things, then the consumers are going to learn the wrong things, right?
Right.
And vice versa.
It's interesting because your book probably would have maybe not even been published had you written it in the 90s, right?
It would have been a very different book.
It would have been a different book. And just listening to you unpack that kind of makes so much sense on a global scale, right? What you're saying, even back to Dom Pérignon, he was doing the things about writing about terroir, writing about a sense of place. You cut to, this idea about the big houses, like we mentioned, the, Moet and Chandon, Veuve Clicquot, Krug, Louis Roederer. So they're buying grapes from these small family-owned vineyards, these growers. And then at some point, right, what happens is you have the 80s and this big corporatization of the world, really, and this more globalization. Human connection is starting to grow across the sea, across the oceans. And then we want status brands. You have popular music talking about these champagne brands. Not that it didn't happen before that, but it wasn't on the same, it didn't get broadcast to the whole world on the same level, right? I mean, something that blew my mind, I was celebrating my sister-in-law's birthday. The world population when she was born in 1990 was 5.2 billion. You look at the world population today, we're over 8 billion. And you just think about that in 35 years. It's crazy at the rapid rate. It's insane, right? So I think about this. And so truly, I think what happened in the 80s, 90s, champagne became a brand. Like you'd have a whiskey, right? And you talk, and the talk was about style. Veuve Clicquot makes it this way. Moet Chandon makes this style, right? even probably it filters upwards to the producers. Like the chef du caves are thinking that, oh, I have to make my Veuve taste like this. I have to make Dom Pérignon taste like this, right? And we're going away from the vintage champagne. So we're having non-vintage. So you have the ability to just craft a style, something that tastes like the label's supposed to taste like that. And then that conversation filters to wine professional, to consumer, to salespeople. And then that's what they're selling. And then it takes a true generational change, like you're saying, for the kids of that. Well, kids always want to rebel or do something different about their parents or have a unique perspective. And they're thinking like, okay, well, there's more information out there. I mean, I still have to grow my farms. And then they probably think like, what were my parents doing selling off these grapes? We have great stuff here. Like, why can't I try and make this wine? And then they try and make the wine. So they're pulling grapes back from the big houses who are buying them. Then it starts the grower champagne movement. And then voila, we have this whole pendulum swinging back towards the growers and the sense of place. I'm sorry. I just had to go on that diatribe to explain it in my brain.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I can agree with that. But also, I think it's important to note that this isn't just champagne. This is reflecting worldwide trends, right?
Totally.
So in the 70s, industrialization and all of this, it affected the entire wine world, like every wine region, not just champagne. And also, this kind of returning back to, I don't know, a kind of neoclassical quest for expression, in like the modern day, like the 2000s, and now, this is also reflecting wider trends in the wine world, not just champagne.
Sure.
So it all makes sense when you put everything together in context, right? And but yeah, it's true that champagne in particular really focused on brand, and they were well positioned to do that because of things like non-vintage champagne, right? Like you say. And to be fair, so the idea of terroir was really played down. When you read wine books of the 1980s, or even in the 1990s, when I first started going to Champagne, there were still people saying that the base wines in Champagne were essentially neutral. Like their function was to be as neutral as possible. And the character of Champagne was derived from the Champagne process. And immediately, from the very beginning, like when I first entered the wine business, my great love was Burgundy. And so, Burgundy was all about like the distinctions of like, little micro distinctions of place. And so then I would read this about Champagne and I would think like, this can't be true. Like, how, like it always rubbed me the wrong way. And so, looking back, like to be really fair to the producers, nobody ever believed that this was true. Because, I would go into a cellar and maybe the chef de cave would tell me, oh yeah, base wines are supposed to be neutral. And yet behind him, there would be a tank of Pinot Noir from a single village, i.e., let's say, and then another tank of Pinot Noir from Ambonnet, and another tank of Pinot Noir from Verzenay. And so if these places didn't matter, if the base wine was really neutral, why would these even be separated?
Right.
They would just be blended all together. And why would the idea of Grand Cru even exist? Like, why would we prefer wine from one region over another if the base wines were completely neutral? So nobody ever believed that kind of narrative. So even though we weren't talking about terroir, producers were still, especially, producers at houses such as, Veuve Clicquot and Moët Chandon, were really thinking about this kind of thing, but it was always at a village level, right? So people would say, well, okay, this is, Pinot Noir from Ailly, which is one of the great Grand Crus of Pinot Noir in Champagne. It was really highly valued for its wine, but it would be a blend of different villages within Ailly, right? And it would create a certain style. So like profile of Ailly Pinot Noir was very well known. But it wasn't until like the 2000s that we as consumers began talking about these distinctions of terroir. All of that stuff was kind of behind the scenes up until this point.
Well, but
in the late 20th century.
It also took the producers to do single bottlings, to do single vineyards, people like Salos. And I talked to Jerome Duor and a lot of these people, Pierre Paillard, to start doing these individual bottlings and actually putting single vineyards, I think, on the label for people for then us as wine professionals, consumers, the like, to then recognize like, oh, what are they talking about? Why are they putting a vineyard on the label of Champagne, right? It's like unheard of. But I also see like how, they always tell you in life, and I hate this, but you follow the money. And while I agree with you that probably chef de caves were probably like, oh no, yeah, like that Pinot Noir from IE has its own specific thing, but like, oh, I just need that, like a spice box to create my end label to taste like what I need. It's like it's the sum of the parts. It's not about the parts. And I think that's where you start to believe your own
Exactly.
narrative until it changes at a grassroots level.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first houses I ever visited was Krug, and at Krug back then they talked a lot about they used a lot of musical analogies,
Oh, I love
which I
it.
really like. Yeah, and I mean they still music is still very important for Krug, but they don't really talk about it in the same way. But it's still valid. They would tell me that uh is the single vineyards like Claude Menil, was a soloist, and the vintage wine coming from a more restricted blend. This would be like chamber music, it would be like a quartet, and
Mm,
and then Grand Cuvée would be like a symphony. And this is a super apt analogy. It's
I
very
love it.
useful, And so yeah, when you're thinking about a symphony, you're not thinking about like, I mean, you might if you're a musician or a music geek, but you're not necessarily thinking about like what the cello is doing or what the oboe is doing. You might during a solo, but when everything's going on, it's like you say, it's the sum that's much more important than the individual components. And so that's exactly what's going on in a champagne blend, right? And so things like IE Pinot Noir or Cremant Chardonnay or whatever, like these become really important components in the blend in the same way as like the first cello and like that second oboe and the timpani guy and whatever. So because of that, then for the winemakers, like these ideas of expressions of place, these ideas, these different characteristics in all their wines, these are all super useful things for them to use in their blends. And like you say, now that we're seeing more and more single terroir wines, it's not necessarily that these are better champagnes, but for us as wine students, it's a lot more interesting because
Yeah,
that allows us to learn about different terroirs in Champagne in a way that we were never able to do before. And that's really exciting.
I agree. And that's again why, yeah, you have become this unbelievable resource to tell us about the champagnes and what producers are doing there. I love that Krug analogy. That makes so much sense in my mind. Okay, so much more to unpack, and I don't even know if we're going to get to the fact that you are also one of the foremost experts on sherry, which
Oh, thank you.
this is not a segue, but what's funny is anytime I do a dinner and I end it with sherry, and there's like a sales component to it, right? Like, oh, people can buy the wines after. Sherry is always like the number one seller because people are so surprised, like, oh my god, I didn't know this. Like, forgot about sherry, and then
Sure.
they're like, this is amazing. But I do want to get back a couple of things. Having said all that, and well, I think this probably sums it up perfectly because I think recently, and this might have changed since this, but your favorite wine ever, what you claimed as your, do you remember what you've claimed as your, the best champagne ever made?
I do not. I imagine it would be something like 1928 Moet. I don't know.
Okay. You,
What did I say at the time?
you said 2013 Louis Roeder Cristal.
Yeah, well, I think I said that was the best Cristal. I mean, okay, I would happily say that that's the best champagne ever made.
Okay.
I mean, there are, I'm not sure it's true. I think there are many, it's potentially true. But I do think that is, I did say that that was the best Cristal rosé ever made.
Okay.
And I really do believe, I continue to believe that. The more I taste it, it's entirely possible that subsequent vintages will surpass it. I hope they will. But when 2013 came out, it was really a revelation. It seemed to, Roederer had been working on these very particular philosophies of vineyard and place and expression ever since the 1996 vintage. So 2013 was really a culmination of, a like a 17-year process. And we had seen incremental, I mean, maybe not even incremental. It's kind of like, in 2001, Space Odyssey, the big like black obelisks that show up at each sort of like huge advancements of the human race. Louis Roederer had these kinds of things, with like, for example, 1996, 2002, 2008, 2012, and then 2013. These were all really kind of important milestones in the evolution of Cristal, but also the evolution of Roederer in general. And so for me, 2013 Cristal, both the Blanc and the Rosé, seemed to encapsulate all of Roederer's ideas and the chef de cave, Jean-Baptiste Le Caillon, all of his ideas and really putting them into practice in a way that we could see in a very like demonstrable manner. And that was really exciting to me, and it still is.
I love that. There's about 20 sommeliers and hipsters knocking at the door right now, ready to, take you to task on that. No, I'm kidding. No, I think that's such a great example, though, of how the pendulum has truly swung when you have arguably one of the biggest houses investing so much into, process, but vineyards and pushing the envelope into new technologies and new growing practices. So that's really cool. I want to,
Yeah, I mean, Roederer is like one of the things that people forget is that so all of Roederer's vintage wines are 100% estate fruit, so they're not negociant wines at all. They're all domain. But then also today, Roederer is regarded as one of the very best viticulturalists in the region. So you talk to people like Anselm Salos and Fred Savard and Raphael Baresh, and yeah, you ask them about Roederer vineyards, and they have nothing but great things to say. It's people like we always want to think that vineyards and viticulture are sort of the province of growers, but houses are paying just as much attention.
especially when they're responsible and environmentally friendly and kind of doing
Absolutely.
all the right things. That's cool. That's really I mean, if nothing else, that is a great example of why champagne is again like on trend and a beacon for wine growing and a sense of place
Mm,
in the wine world right now.
yeah.
If when you're talking about, like I said, one of the big houses leading the charge. I want to get back to that conversation about dosage. I know you've had this conversation with
Mhm.
everybody that you've talked to, but I want to have it with you because
Yeah.
you
Sure.
have
Sure.
I think, a unique perspective on dosage. And I'll paraphrase basically, or say it as much as I understand it, is like dosage should not be dogmatic. You should make
Absolutely.
a dosage, like you're saying, the salt expression that highlights and brings out the best of your wine. I love that. And I could not agree more. However, in this day and age, the more you know, the less you know, and we have this polarizing topic of sugar, refined sugar. You yourself has said, you don't put sugar in your coffee, you don't put sugar on your food, or if you don't cook with it. So, if I want to seek out the best non-dosage wines, the brut zeros of the world, like I should be able to do that. So, how do I go about doing that?
Well, I mean, the thing about champagne is that it is very clearly, well, to an extent, it's pretty clearly stated on the label. So if really you are militantly against any kind of added sugar, then on the label you can seek out brut nature or brut zero or non-dosé or whatever number of different terms that indicate that the wine doesn't have any dosage. But to me, that's as sensical or as nonsensical as saying, like I don't cook without any salt. So I mean, we all know, right? You buy the perfect piece of meat, and I don't care how good it is, if you don't salt it, it's not going to be as good as it would have been.
I agree with that.
So and it's not. I mean, the problem with dosage is that we see these numbers, right? And so it's something that we latch onto. Salting like a piece of beef is not about necessarily like how many milligrams of salt. Like it's not this like formula of how many milligrams of salt you need. It's we all. I mean, in some sense, we have preference, but also we all know when a dish is undersalted or oversalted. And it's the same way with dosage. It's like it's the winemaker's job to figure out at what point is this dosage correct for this particular wine. And if you're experienced with champagne and you know what you're looking for, then it's very easy to tell when a wine is underdosed or overdosed. But when a champagne is properly dosed, the sugar completely disappears into the background. You don't
Mhm.
even read it as sweetness anymore. You just feel like the wine is harmonious and complete, and that's what we're really striving for. And that can happen. Every wine is different. Some wines might need 9 grams of sugar to be able to do that. Some wines might need 5. Some wines might need 1. And then there are a very small minority of champagnes that might need none at all, and that might need 0. I think one of the things that we don't talk about is that a lot of the really successful zero dosage champagnes actually have a little bit of residual sugar left over from fermentation. That helps them, helps them like achieve balance
Are they doing that
in
purposely?
different ways.
Like are they stopping
Not
fermentation at some
necessarily.
point?
It's
No.
just, today we're harvesting riper and riper. So you might harvest, you might harvest your grapes very ripe, and fermentation doesn't finish completely, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do know of a few champagne producers who are now starting to write on the label, instead of writing dosage on the label, they're writing total sugar, including sugar, because they feel like this is part of the conversation that's been ignored.
So it'll be more like an Alsatian model at some point? Like you'll see the scale in the back maybe?
Maybe. I mean, I think personally that as a wine consumer, you shouldn't even pay attention to this at all. Like it's just not even important. It's like, in some sense, it's like asking a writer, like, what kind of pen they use, or like asking a chef, I mean, we don't ask chefs like how many milligrams of salt did you put in this dish? Like it's just not
Okay.
a question that comes up.
So that's a good point though from a producer perspective. Like I understand what you're saying, that it's like it's almost like it's experience, wisdom, and feel about how much dosage a wine needs. However, if we're making a dish, like or if you're following a recipe, oh, filet mignon needs this much salt, ribeye needs this much salt, or to use your example, which I think was brilliant, your analogy of making lemonade, right? You have the ripping acidity of fresh, if you're making real lemonade, of the fresh lemon juice, and you need to add sugar to balance it. Now, I would say like there's probably an accepted level there of how much sugar you should add per lemons, right? There's somebody has a recipe somewhere, or you could chat
Yeah,
GPT it, right? So how does
probably.
that not apply to making champagne,
Well,
dosing
so
champagne?
with lemonade, it's a fairly simple process of balance, right? You're really your sugar is there really to counter acidity. And so you're looking for a balance of sugar and acidity.
Mm,
In champagne, yes, you can say that dosage provides that function, but that's only one of the functions that it provides. Like it's much, much more complex than that. Dosage is not just a tool to balance acidity. I mean, that's like you read that sometimes in wine books, and that's a very narrow part of the picture. Really, the main function of dosage is to increase expression. It's exactly like salt in food, where salt, even when it doesn't necessarily make things saltier, it allows other components to become more expressive.
yeah.
Right? It opens up other flavors, and that's what dosage does in champagne, and you can see it very clearly. Like when if you're fortunate enough to taste with the producer, through the dosage process, like maybe tasting the same wine at different dosage levels, or, tasting the wine without dosage and tasting it with dosage, then you can really see how the dosage changes the wine. And I mean, and even a lot of producers like don't really understand it in this way. Sometimes we hear producers say like, well, I don't put any dosage in my wine because I want the minerality to really show. Like it's the purest expression of terroir. And this is like an untrue statement, because expression increases at the right dosage. And so by underdosing your wine, like if your wine is perfectly complete at zero dosage, then yeah, you're fine. But if your wine really needs like 3 grams of dosage to be properly expressive, then you're actually killing the expression of terroir by releasing it as a non-dosé.
Right.
Because it's not saying all that it has, it's not showing all that it has to give. And so I think the best producers really understand that, and they understand that expression involves a lot of things, right? It involves like fruit, it involves like harmony and balance and balance of acidity, all this, but it also like it's expression of terroir, and expression of place comes along with finding that proper dosage also increases your expression of place.
How,
And
how did you learn that, Peter? Like, was that just a function of you tasting? Did a producer kind of tell you that, and then or did you read it from one of the old books? Like, how did you figure that out?
yeah, that was years of tasting.
Years of tasting.
That was something that I had to discover for myself over many, many years. Yeah, I probably was a big fan too I was certainly a big fan of the lowering of dosage, and I was very interested to taste wines that didn't have any dosage, because I mean, like you say, I don't put sugar in my coffee. I cook very, very little with refined sugar, so why would I want it in my wine? So, but yeah, I think that the more experience you have, and the more you see its true function and realize exactly what it contributes to a blend.
Rote question disclaimer here. Was there an epiphany wine that made you say, like, I get it now? This wine has sugar and it's absolutely perfect.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Necessarily. I think it was a process. It was a process of tasting a lot of wines that were properly dosed and a lot that were improperly dosed. In the 2000s, like when there was this big rush to lower dosage, there were a lot of wines that came out that were underdosed and kind of deliberately, or I think everybody got excited about lowering dosage and
Right.
and people kind of went overboard. It came back a little bit, but yeah, it's the most misunderstood topic,
Yeah.
champagne. I think.
Okay. Well, I know we're getting a little short on time, so I just want to hit two more things before I let you go. What's your daily life like? From the outside, wine professional looking in, I imagine you like strolling through Champagne, getting to travel to New
Yeah.
York, going through a bunch of tastings, and then like I'm sure you still write, but like, what is it like in your relationship with the producers these days? I don't know if you're working on anything like, yeah, what's your daily life like these days?
Well, so I live in Champaign. I live in the city of Epernay.
Yeah.
That's where I'm based. But I do travel a lot. I travel both for work and for pleasure. As you know, I'm a scuba diver, so there's no scuba diving in Champagne outside of the Marne River.
Unfortunately.
So so I need to travel for that. But also, I travel a lot for work. I do a lot of education and events around the world. At the moment, I'm in the U.S. Because we're about to do this year's edition of La Fête du Champagne, which
Yeah.
is
We didn't even talk about
a
that.
yeah, it's an event that Daniel Jonas and I created back in 2014. So yeah, this year we've expanded it to be larger than ever. We're doing two large events, one in New York and one in Los Angeles, and then a smaller event in Chicago. And we've also partnered with Champagne Seoul in South Korea. So I'll be going there in between New York and LA. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. But yeah, so when I'm in Champagne, I try to taste as much as possible. I try and make as many visits as I possibly can, and because I want to take advantage of the time that I have there. But I'm also traveling around the world a lot. Um,
When you visit producers, are you voraciously taking notes? And like, what's that relationship like? Are people like, I know you're friends and you live amongst them, but are producers still like, is he going to write about it? Is he going to critique it? Like, what is that? What is that tasting experience like for you?
I think for most people, I've known them for so long that now we can be very honest with each other.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm very critical, of course, because that's my job.
Yeah.
But also, I don't really dwell on negatives, right? So I know there are a lot of writers who relish, writing about tour wines. Whatever. This is 78 points, earthy and woods like. This is a terrible wine. I mean,
Right.
I don't have time to do that kind of thing, right? I would
Yeah. It
rather
also
just focus
doesn't,
on writing about good wines.
yeah, it doesn't benefit our industry.
Yeah, yeah. And so with producers, yeah, we'll often talk about, why I think this wine is more successful than that wine. But I think that especially for the people that I've known for a long time, we're at that point in our relationship where we can really be honest with each other. And I value that. I appreciate that.
Has there ever been a time where a notable producer that you have a long-term relationship with, they might have felt very positive about a wine and you did not feel that same thing and you let them know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And all in good nature, like there have been wines. Well, there have been instances like that where we've disagreed strongly on a wine and they've spent many years later, trying to convince me and
Otherwise,
pouring this wine over and over. Sometimes to their credit, sometimes like I've changed my mind. And yeah, I mean,
but
wine is a moving target.
they respect your feedback and you feel comfortable saying your honest opinion in those moments and
Yeah, I
it
think
like
so.
doesn't
I think so. Yeah.
cause friction or is it ever like cause not to be sensational, but like does it ever cause
Yeah.
like a parting of the ways in your relationship?
No, I've never had that. I've never had
Okay.
had that happen to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've disagreed with producers about individual wines, but yeah, I don't think that, that has damaged our relationship.
Fair. When is La Fête du Champagne?
So this
When is
weekend, we're
it's this
we're doing
weekend?
Chicago. Well, so Chicago's this weekend, but then next week is New York City next weekend, and then Los Angeles
Sorry,
is
as this come, we're talking in real time, but you're
yeah.
talking about it will be October 20,
So yeah, so the weekend of the 18th in
the
Chicago,
weekend,
and
the weekend of,
the weekend of October 25
okay,
in New York, and then Los Angeles will happen in November.
okay. When in November?
It will be, let's see, we're doing Champagne Soul on the weekend of November 8th, and then Los Angeles will be the weekend of November 15th.
November 15th. Mark your calendars, folks. If you want to see Peter, go find him at the Fête du Champagne in LA, November 15th. Last question I have, and this probably didn't get to spend enough time, but by the way, I'm going to need I'm going to ask you to come back and talk to me about sherry at some point. We got to do a whole
Absolutely, I
discussion
would love
about
to.
sherry. Awesome.
I would love to.
We talk about climate change. There's no question that climate change is happening, and arguably it's happening more rapidly than ever before. What I'm trying to understand and wrap my head about that is climate change the climate is always changing. And we've had cool periods in our history. We've had warm periods in our history. So how is that affecting Champagne now? Two-parter there. What's going to be the difference going forward? How are we combating it? Are we going to see more Coteau Champagne, still wines from the Champagne region? And are we seeing other grape varietals that are going to be more prominent in Champagne?
All good questions. And climate change is certainly like the most pertinent topic in Champagne at the moment. It's the issue that affects everybody, and it's not just Champagne. It's the wine world in general, and it's the world in general, right? I mean, the planet. None of us on this planet are free of the effects of climate change. It's true that there have been cycles in the past, but we've never seen cycles as extreme as they are now.
Mm.
And I think that if you look objectively at the data, then you can really see that it's human influence. That we as humans have exacerbated these changes, or have maybe caused the cycles to reach extremes that we've never seen. And we feel that in Champagne a lot. Champagne, I think you start to feel it most in marginal wine regions. So places like the Moselle, or like Champagne being historically the northernmost viticultural area of France. Places that are on the margins, you see the effects much quicker. And in Champagne, let's say a generation and a half ago, or let's say 2 generations ago, the harvest would always start in October. Maybe 1 generation ago, then it would be mid to late September. And 2003, first time that we ever had a harvest, first time in recorded history that we ever had a harvest start in August. And everybody thought, oh, this is a total aberration, never going to happen again. Since 2003, we've had 7, I believe, 7 harvests that have since started in August. And now we kind of take it for granted that August harvests are the new normal. We just prepare for harvest in August. We talk about warm vintages, right? And certainly we've had a string of exceptionally warm vintages recently. And so people will say, well, we had warm vintages in the past, 96, like 1962, 1959, 1947. These were all warm vintages. So maybe we're seeing them more frequently now, but they're the same. The thing is, they're not the same. So Freddie Panayotis, the former chef de cave of Ruinart, who sadly passed away earlier this year, he was the one who showed me this data concerning the Hughlin index, which is this index to measure heat in a little more sophisticated way than just like degree days or sunshine hours. But so it measures sort of and wine regions around the world and categorizes them according to these numbers. And Champagne hit an all-time high in 2018. We had seen these spikes before in these warmer vintages.
When you say an all-time high, in the most amount of these heat days, or just an all-time temperature?
Yeah. So the highest number on the Hughlin index, like basically the highest number ever recorded.
Okay.
In Champagne. So much higher than vintages like 59 or 76, or it was like in completely new territory. And in fact, the Hughlin index, like the numbers in Champagne in 2018, basically the same as Chateauneuf du Pape in the 1990s. So we can no longer pretend that Champagne is a cool weather wine region, is a cool climate wine region, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've entered a whole new era. And since 2018, we've had many more vintages like this, right? It's become normal now. So 2018, 2019, 2020, 22, 22 was really sort of an extreme. 25, again, we're seeing these extreme patterns of weather happening in Champagne that have completely changed the climate, that have completely changed the wines, right? We're making completely different, like different styles of wine now than we used to. Not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, you can argue that Champagne is better now than it's ever been,
Hmm.
but certainly we're not making wines like we did in the past. And that's just something that we have to live with, right? It's not good or bad. It's just the reality. And so it's up to producers and growers and winemakers to adjust to these new climatic conditions. And they will. I mean, when 2003 came out, nobody had ever seen this before. And so the wines were a little bit awkward. Many wines, three were a little bit weird. But we saw conditions like '03 come again later, and people had learned from that, and they made better wines in the warmer vintages to come. So people are going to adapt. They're going to figure out what they need to do. But there's no doubt that in Champagne, for me, I think that in the future, when we look back at Champagne, we're going to see 2018 as a kind of turning point. We're going to talk about climate in Champagne before 2018 and climate afterwards. And I think we're in kind of uncharted territory now. We're in a new era for Champagne.
Wow. Okay. So what are we going to do? Are we going to make more still wines in Champagne? Are we going to plant different varietals? Or Jeremy Sates, when he was on for talking about Burgundy, said that they were going to maybe plant different plant material at some point. What is going to be done?
Certainly people are looking at all of these things. Genetic material is a big topic right now in Champagne. Everybody is making still wine. So more and more people are making still wine. I don't think that still wine is going to take over in our lifetimes. I mean, right now, there are some very, very good still wines being made, but even the very best still wines are not nearly as good as the best champagnes, the best sparkling wines.
What about compared to other world-class Pinot Noir making regions or Chardonnay
Yeah,
making
it's still
regions?
not as good. Yeah,
Okay.
it's still not as good. I mean, I like the best red and white still wines in Champagne for their identity.
Okay.
They do say something that's very champenois. They feel very champenois, and they can be of very good quality, but we can't pretend that they have the same kind of complexity and depth and resonance as like Great Grand Cru Burgundy, or it's just we're not there yet.
Okay.
And when you taste those wines and you taste Champagne by the same producer, you really see, as always, why the Champagne process exists. It's because in this region it just makes a better wine.
Hmm.
And that's as true today as it was, 200 years ago.
Okay. What about different varietals?
There's experiments. I don't think that it's going to happen. Well, so we've already introduced one variety. It's a hybrid called Voltis. I haven't tasted it yet. All my friends who have tell me that it's terrible. I suspect that it wasn't introduced really to be used on its own so much as to cross with Chardonnay to try and like bring more like resistance properties. But yeah, I don't think that like we can take Voltis like seriously as like an answer. I'm not sure that we're going to see other varieties really. I mean, I think the general feeling right now is that we would rather work with the varieties that we have rather than introduce new ones from outside, because that introducing new varieties really fundamentally changes your appellation. It changes your wine like entirely.
Isn't
And
there
the thing is
already
that,
a lot of Pinot Blanc planted like in
well,
certain
so yeah,
spots?
so the thing about Champagne is that we have 7 varieties, now 8, that are authorized, and we really only use 3 of them, right?
Right.
So we only use Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier like 99% of the time. So we do have these other varieties that we could play with if you want to. Arbonne and Petit Melier in particular have really high acidity. So Arbonne especially. And so some growers or some producers are seeing this as a way to, like, if you are concerned about acidity levels, this could be a way to put a like little drop of Petit Melier in your blend, and that could be a way to like increase your total acidity. It's entirely possible. It does change your flavors a bit, but if that's fine with you, or if you like that, then there's that's one avenue. that you could take. But I think, other people are looking at what can I do with my Chardonnay and my Pinot Noir to, maybe can I trellis differently? Can I farm differently? Am I looking at different yields? Am I looking at different picking times? How do I respond to these extremes of climate change, but still make the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that I want to? That's kind of the prevailing, trend of thought.
Okay. Last question, Peter, and then we're going to be done. We'll get you out of here. Okay. October 24th is Global Champagne Day. What will you be doing or drinking to celebrate?
That's a good question. I didn't even think about it. I mean, for sure, I'll be drinking champagne because I do drink champagne on most days. But yeah, I didn't even realize that was coming up. So now that you mention it, I'll have to go and look for a special bottle.
Okay. Well, you'll have to take a picture and show us what you're drinking, or, give us some of your choices. Other than that, thank you so much for your time here and for all your knowledge and insight. I really appreciate it. For everybody out there, if you're interested in champagne, go check out champagneguide.net. That's Peter Liem's website of all things champagne. Get yourself a subscription. Also buy the book, Champagne, the Essential Guide to the Wines, Producers, and Terroirs of the Iconic Region, and you will drink deliciously. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Matt.